What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 3 of the Sensible Solutions Coaching Podcast.
Yes.
That's us.
Okay. How's everything been going since we last talked? How's y'all's weeks been going? We'll start with Eric. I'm gonna start with Eric this time.
Good week, let's see. I have 12 more check-ins I have to get through today, so that's fun. Mondays are check-in. We're recording on a Monday. Um, let's see. Gym's been good. Lots of clients over there. Training was pretty good this week. Jeff and I did this fun thing on legs. What was it? Yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay. It was something you guys may have seen Lee Priest talking about when he used to train with Tom Platz. There's lots of footage of that floating around the internet. And he was a couple times I've seen him talk about this thing where he said this is what we did on leg press. 2 plates per side for 20, 3 plates per side for 30, 4 plates per side for 40, 5 plates per side for 50. So it was pretty gnarly. The pump was pretty
You
good.
wanted to go back down.
I wanted to go back down. Jeff wouldn't do it. I thought back down would make sense. I don't know.
That was a third movement in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, good week. How about you guys? Who's next?
What about you, Austin?
Um, Dude, last week was super busy. It was one of those where I feel like everyone sent their blood work and in the same week, like one of those types of weeks and some inquiries and stuff. But good. Everything is going well. We have seminar coming up in a couple weeks to do
Nice.
that one in Vegas, which is on a Monday and Tuesday, which I'm not super pumped about. But we'll do what we got to do. But outside of that, man, I can't really complain. Training's going pretty good. I don't want to eat anymore. I'm at that point.
Oh,
So
your food's that high?
it's not, you know what? It's not outrageously high. I mean, I've had it higher before, but I think it's also a body weight thing. I think there's kind of like a combination of things when I get to a certain body weight, get to certain food level, because I could eat this amount of food after a show, no problem,
Mm.
right? It's like the cumulative effect of that over time. Because I
Well, we
think,
did the same show. How was your reverse? How's it been since December?
yeah, I mean, it's been good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like 243,
Wow.
242, 243 right now. But
Dude, holy shit. Have you been that big before?
yeah, I've been that heavy. I've been a little bit heavier than that before, but not really, not pretty.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
this is like a pretty solid 242, 243. But I'm done with light heavyweight class, man. Like I can't, I look really good. I look really good at like 210.
Yeah.
Oh, so you should do heavyweight. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I made light heavies and I think I was like 209 on stage
Oh,
by the time I got
did
up
you have to
there.
suffer? Did you have to like really
Yeah,
suffer down?
I mean, I think I was 6 or 7 pounds over the day before still.
Wow.
So, and we did a good job filling out. So, I mean, it's still in all reality, and I understand like a lot of people have to do that if you're kind of a tweener,
Yeah.
with the classes.
Yes,
But at this point,
I've never seen you in person except for that backstage, but we didn't really
yeah,
say hi or anything. But so I don't know
yeah,
what you walk around at. I didn't know you were 240. Holy shit.
yeah, and when you're eating a lot of food and stuff too, 10 pounds of that's water that drops off in the first
Oh,
week
sure.
once
Yeah.
you start. But I think if I could be 210 to 213, like I would say 209 to 213 on stage and not have to pull down and just be able to get lean early and just eat into the show for a couple weeks,
Yeah.
it would yield a pretty good look. And I'm old enough to do masters, so
Well,
I'm
it
banking
doesn't,
on the
people get so worked up about,
masters thing.
yeah, but people get so worked up about body weight, dude. Like I was, I was 189, the day before, I think, right, Jeff?
Yeah. We got you down
89. And
lighter than you were the previous year.
yeah, lighter
Yeah.
than light. And I placed, from 16th to 5th being lighter. So it's
Yeah,
like,
and you and I, so you actually, just what I kind of perceived is I have like a bigger frame. You're very dense and like a slightly more compact frame. You fit into the class really, really well. I
mm,
kind of have heavyweight limbs, like as far
you
as
got to fill out a little
my
more.
shoulder girdle and all that
Mm,
stuff. So in the off season, I mean, I look like a heavyweight bodybuilder in the off season with I'm like big and blown out and full,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I just it's hard at a national level when you go like NPC national level. It's really difficult to justify being 205 as a heavyweight unless you're
Mhm.
just an absolute freak.
You think what it'll be that drastic? Like it'll just get blown away?
I think I would just be too small.
I don't know,
Just
dude. I mean, Nationals is obviously the best, most competitive show for amateurs, but it's still amateur. There's still a lot of heavyweights up there that were just the only heavyweight.
and that's
You
true.
know,
But again, I'm just gonna do masters next time, dude. No shame.
are you're just gonna send it to Masters? Yeah,
Yeah, dude, I live in Ohio too, so I have masters, nationals, and North Americans
yeah.
like 3 hours from my house
Oh, easy. You don't have to go to
in
Texas.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can just go to Pittsburgh.
nice. Okay,
So that's where we're at. But
right on.
I don't like
Well, how
walking
long do you
around.
think you're gonna compete for? You ever think about that?
I, honestly, if I, God willing, even if it's masters, if I can get a pro card, that'll be it.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Maybe I would do one of the masters pro shows in 212 just because I already have the damn card.
Yeah,
But I just don't, I mean, 212, I'm too tall.
same. Yeah,
And open,
I know. I know. I'm in
what
the same. But I know.
is
What the
that?
fuck am I
What are
gonna?
you gonna do with that?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't do open. I mean, they'll take my money,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm certainly not standing up there. I mean, I prep a couple open guys, and I'm like, dude, no, I'm not doing that shit.
Do you
I'm not
know?
embarrassing myself.
Do you think those guys? How do I say it? Were they already big? Like
A lot of
like
them.
were they 18 years old, like benching 3 plates or
Some
some
of
shit,
them.
and then because I don't. I feel like I do everything I can, and I'm not
I mean,
250 pounds. You
Well,
know what I
think
mean?
about someone like Nick Walker. I mean, have you seen
Yeah,
his original photos? He wasn't
that's
jacked on his
He's
true.
face.
like
That's
165
true.
pounds.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
you just got
Yeah.
to think about it. Like,
How do you respond to everything?
right. And you got to think about, like, what's their ability to not die
Well,
when pushing
that's
things.
gonna
And,
kind of
like,
segue into what we were gonna be talking about, right? Their health just holding up. Like I wonder so much that if the top guys actually like do all the testing and the echocardiograms and the lab work and the this and the that and they know exactly what's going on, or if they're just like, I don't care, or if it's both, if they see the horrible results but they're like, I still don't care. I want to know. I really want to know.
I
You
think
know?
you'd get mixed answers.
You
yeah.
think?
100%. I mean, there's
Yeah.
some that are there are definitely some that are paying attention to that stuff, but there's let's say this, like let's say that these cases pop up and they're like get on their Instagram and they announce that they're in stage 5 renal failure. I said, do you realize how many steps there are in your like EGFR reading before you get to a 12? Like
Oh,
where
so they were
I
just
said
like,
it
I'll
didn't
push it a little
just
more. I'll push it a little more. I'll
like it
push it a
didn't
little more.
just happen, right?
Mm,
At
mm.
what point throughout that decline did you think, oh, this is not good?
Yeah,
Either A, they ignored it, or B, they never checked. So there's
right.
really only because that doesn't happen overnight,
Yeah.
you
It's
know.
such a you have to win the genetic lottery to be a good bodybuilder,
Sure.
right?
Resilience is one of those factors,
Hmm.
but
But in all aspects, not
response,
just like your internal health, your joints, your tendons,
yeah,
you name it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Hmm.
So that segues us into that topic then, because we wanted to
Yeah.
talk about the cardiovascular health and some of the different forms of testing and things we should be paying attention to there. Because I think now a lot of people do go beyond just the basic HDL, LDL type of deal. We know there's other things out there like APOBs and there's scans, echoes, and calcium scores, and
Yeah.
but I think that's something really good too. Even just talk about like what other systems are correlated with heart health, because when you look at bodybuilders, what two systems fail? Kidneys and heart.
Yeah.
And usually they fail in conjunction with each other, or one leads to the other type of thing. It's like I have heart failure, but then you also realize that their blood pressure had been chronically high for X number of years, which had compromised their kidney health. So there was a lot of strain, a lot of fluid on their heart. So there's like a lot of things that kind of happen in conjunction there. So if we were just to start and give some blanket, like what are the things that we should really pay most attention to?
So I'll start first. Like for me at
Yeah.
least, was like fasted insulin levels. I mean, that's one that like I think Austin, you and I talked to Serrano about this one time.
Mm-hmm.
Like he truly believes that like insulin resistance and insulin levels chronically elevated is more of a higher precursor of heart issues, cardiovascular issues than any lipid panel. Like I know there's been times like I still remember at your seminar when he's like sitting there berating me, yelling at me for being a stupid freaking bodybuilder and ignoring some of the stuff that I was ignoring in my younger 20s. And I know with me, like when my levels were like super crazy, and I remember you and I talking about it back in 2020, that was one thing I always ignored. And just saying, it's okay, it's not going to hurt anything. But once you dig into the data and dig in what actually insulin level, like insulin does, like I would say that's a marker that even today, I feel like a lot of people aren't checking. I don't know why. They're not taking consideration. They're just checking A1C and fasting blood glucose and they're like, okay, I'm fine. But I would say that's like a not an unknown marker, but just one that people forget. They forget that that's going to damage the arteries. And I always use the example of like if your arteries are a straw, and those insulin levels are like damaging that straw. Now you got sharp points. That plaque is going to build up that much faster.
Right.
And for me, that's always been a big one for me because I've chronically struggled with that issue for years and always ignored it for years. So I think right off the bat, that's one that just not enough people pay attention to, or they don't consider it. And I still see it today, whether it's bodybuilders or lifestyle clients or functional clients. It's just one marker that doctors still don't pull. Or I know when mine were at the highest in the 50s, like my doctor wasn't the least bit concerned. He didn't really care.
Wow.
But I remember that was like my wake up call was like, I need to get my shit together. And that's what ultimately pulled me out of bodybuilding.
Fasted insulin in the 50s, you said?
Yeah. Yeah. That was back when my like blood glucose dude was like in the 300s fasted.
What?
What?
And I was
What were you
taking
doing
like,
to yourself?
right. It was like
Wow, dude.
150, 200 IUs of Lantus just to get it regulated. And that was like at the very end when like my liver was having issues, I was having gallbladder issues. I was like, you know what, I just have to stop. And I know it took me a couple years to get those levels down to now it kind of sits in that 6 to 9. And even then, like I get a little bit concerned with my past history, but I know when that was happening, I always joke with Austin, he had me do a calcium score and an echo and everything because I had notoriously for years had like a HDL of a 1 or a 2 all the time. I was like, it's okay, whatever. It doesn't really matter. And calcium score was perfect. There's still nothing on there. There's absolutely no issues.
The echo didn't. You were good on the echo. No left
Perfect.
ventricle
No
hypertrophy.
left
Nothing.
ventricle growth. There's nothing. And I don't know how because
Wow.
I abused
Yeah, but
PE.
how long though? That's the
Yeah. How long?
Right. It was like 5 years of abuse. It was 20 to 25. I mean, I don't
And
know if that
nothing.
was,
And
no.
nothing.
cumulatively.
See, talk about genetics. Jesus Christ.
Right. But I'm not doing it anymore. Like, I
Yeah.
just
Yeah, I know,
couldn't
but
do
still,
anything.
your heart's fine. That's
Right.
crazy.
You
I
didn't
mean, it's
do it
good.
for
It's fantastic. It's just it's
yeah,
wild.
Right.
yeah. The
So I think the insulin markers is just one that no one's paying attention to. Like I don't think they're not registering what the function is or what that does to the body.
Yeah.
I like what you said there about art because when you look at heart failure, that's kind of broad. I mean, you could have a blockage and which would cause a heart attack, or
Mhm.
you could have heart failure like the heart stops working, right? Independent of a blockage, right? Because having like a heart attack or stroke from a blockage or a blood clot could be an acute. Well, blockages take time to build up. Now, maybe not a stroke necessarily, but blockages take time to build up. But heart failure would just insinuate like strain on the heart over time. So those things could happen via different mechanisms. Because you think like to Trey's example of the straw, there's you think of cholesterol, a couple things have to happen for you to actually build up plaque. So I've gone back and forth with this over years, and there's people that say LDL doesn't mean anything, total cholesterol doesn't mean anything, and some people say that it does. But if you think about it, if lipid particles can get damaged and the damaged particles are more likely to stick to the arterial walls, the more of them that are in there, if 5% of those are getting oxidized or glycated, 5% of 100 versus 5% of 250 LDL is a drastically different, there's a lot more in there that could go wrong.
What do you
right?
mean they get damaged?
So when they say damage, the particles can get oxidized by free radical damage, like not having enough antioxidants in the diet or oxidative stress from gear, from poor digestion, from inflammation, right?
Okay.
Then glycation would suggest like damage from glucose molecules, so like insulin resistance,
Oh.
because
So having high glucose
Right.
will literally damage lipids in your bloodstream,
so
which makes them more likely to
it's like
stick and
altering
clot up.
it's like altering the structure of the lipid, and then the smaller, because if you get a particle size done, like an NMR profile, they'll show you how big particles, small particles. The whole theory behind that is that the big particles, the big fluffy, what they call them, like big fluffy particles, don't really have much susceptibility to sticking to the arterial walls.
We were talking about this at dinner the other
Yeah.
night, actually, because I thought it would be the opposite. I thought the bigger ones would be more dangerous.
Yeah,
but
so the
it's
small
actually
ones, the small hard
yeah.
particles are the ones that are damaging. Now, so let's say you have risk factors of that. You have like insulin resistance, right? And like chronic inflammation. So those would be damaging and scratching up the arterial walls and causing the particles to be damaged. So now you're at a high risk. Even if your lipid profile is the same as someone else's, the particles that you have circulating, you're at a higher risk of those sticking, right?
So ideally, you want bigger particles, bigger.
Yeah, but
What is
that's
it,
only
LDL
one.
particles we're talking about.
That's only like one. That would be talking about our what's the I always butcher this one, atherosclerosis. So like or plaque buildup, hard plaque, soft plaque, that type of stuff. But that's one piece of it. But then you have the other piece that bodybuilders get into too, which is the strain on the actual the function of the heart.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is where your kidneys come into that a lot. Right.
And that's where blood pressure, like you were talking about.
You're talking, the blood pressure, the size of the heart getting the thickening of the walls, things like that. And I don't know the stats on this, but if I think about it, I think, and I don't know, like, I've never really studied this in depth, but I kind of wonder if we looked at the stats of deaths, are there more deaths from blockages or are there more deaths from the heart failing? And I would probably say there's more deaths from the heart failing.
I mean, it's a scary thing to think about. It's muscle tissue, and everything we're doing or bodybuilders are doing, and all the drugs you're taking are designed to build muscle tissue.
Right.
And you start thickening up specifically the left ventricle, and then it doesn't pump as well. It's horrifying, and that's just genetics, right? That's like oh, my triceps won't grow. Oh, well, my heart doesn't grow, so
yeah. Ejection, your ejection fraction gets really, really, really low, and so the heart's not pumping well. But again, I really, if I think about all the deaths, how many times do you hear about someone having a full blockage in the heart? I mean, it probably happens, but
they usually just say heart attack.
Which it could be that could be the reason for it, but I kind of wonder.
Isn't that what happens when your injection fracture gets low enough where it's just like it's
right, and then it stops. So I kind of again, that's why I kind of wonder which of those things is actually more of a driver.
Yeah.
Is it a plaque? Is it like plaque buildup, or is it just strain on the heart that's causing it to fail? Because you hear about so many kidney issues, I'd almost have to venture to say that it's more heavily, at least in our industry, is more heavily tied into the kidneys and the heart failing. Now, if you were just a Western, a general population, you ate McDonald's 4 times a day for your whole life, you're going to have a shitload of plaque buildup.
Just
right?
Plaque buildup. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an enlarged heart.
Right. But I kind of wonder like which of those things comes into play the most.
It's scary too that echoes aren't standard testing. You have to really like work the system to try to get an echo.
Yeah.
And
I had to
most
lie
most
that it ran in my family to get one, and I still paid a crap ton out of pocket because I was 24, 25 at the time.
wow, yeah. And a lot of bodybuilders are in pretty good shape. So even if your injection fracture is low, you're not going to be presenting the usual symptoms.
A good way to go about those tests is just go in there and say, you have high blood pressure, or you're experiencing like, frequent bouts of tachycardia, like high,
Yeah.
heart rate.
I was told the magic phrase is I'm having shortness of breath during
Yeah.
exercise. And then I go, oh,
That's what
okay,
they
take the box. Yeah.
put the Holter monitor on you and, get a 24 or a 7-day reading of your heart rate, and that's where the fun begins.
Yep.
Yeah.
Been through all of that.
I had an echo done. I had an echo and a calcium score in 2021, I think, about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And my calcium score was 0
Yeah.
Nice.
Good.
then. I'll probably have it rechecked at some point. I mean, I haven't had like I didn't have a huge sense of urgency to do it every year at that point. Serrano's like, we'll get it checked again in 5 years, something like that. And my echo was completely normal. But
That's great. That's really great.
but yeah, and the funny thing about that is I was peak. Not that this would affect these things necessarily, but I mean, I was basically peak high food, high body weight, the whole thing.
And it was holding
So
up.
so you see, I guess when you see that, your blood work might, and if you're on a cycle or a blast, your blood work might reflect that, but the tests are reflecting more long-term
Mhm.
effects, whereas the blood works is it could be long-term effects, but it's more acute effects of what you're doing.
I mean, it's really a lot of testing, and it's also, how do I say it? Not always going to tell you everything,
No.
right? If you really want to be in charge of your health and know what's going on when you're, especially, I mean, we seem to be talking more about bodybuilders who are kind of gambling, with it.
Well, I think like,
Um,
to keep our discussion here on track and, applicable for our listeners, I think maybe, what tests should, people get, like, let's say like age 35 and up, especially being male, especially, if you're using PEDs. I think we can all agree that an echo or a CT coronary, EKG, these things are probably pretty standard. Um, what else would you guys recommend?
You do. I definitely think having being in tune with insulin resistance markers, so not just glucose, but fasting insulin is good because a lot of people use insulin. So
Yeah.
you can manipulate your glucose level to basically indefinitely if you just keep using more insulin, you know. And a really easy way to tell that is what is your insulin requirement?
Mhm.
If you are using insulin in an off season and your requirements are getting really, really high, I mean, that might be an indication that, you're very insulin resistant
Yeah.
despite your
It's
glucose
not
level
working
being
anymore.
normal.
Yeah.
Like, well, my glucose is an 86. I'm like, well, yeah, but you're also taking 80 units of insulin a day or
Yeah.
whatever. Like,
I
that's
think
kind of a moot point.
overall, what I think people need to understand is like, the heart and your arteries and blood vessels and all that is, just basically, it's a pump and a bunch of tubes. And, the pump and the tubes are important because they carry oxygen, they carry nutrients. And, the liver and the kidneys, they're just filters and they release other hormones into the system. And then obviously, the kidneys help you excrete waste products. So it's a whole interconnected system, and that's why it's so important to prioritize heart health.
Yeah. Blood pressure. That's another one.
That's
You know,
such an easy one to manage too. I
yeah.
can't believe people let that get out of control. You
Well,
get a
Yeah, it
cuff,
can
blood
feel
pressure and
goes on.
renal markers,
Yeah.
check your blood pressure. And if you're going to check you should be checking your blood pressure, but make sure you're using a bigger cuff. This is like basic stuff. Make sure if you are a bodybuilder, you're going to need an extra large cuff, even if you're not huge. It's going to give you false readings. Checking renal markers. So GFR, I mean, GFR works, but some of those are manipulated by muscle mass. So you can do cystatin C level might be a little bit more accurate. Urinalysis is another one too. If you are someone that's had issues with your GFR or cystatin C, like you can go if you ordered labs, for example, from Life Extension, it's like $25 to get a urinalysis. They just give you the cup when you go in. And so after you get your blood drawn, you pee in the little cup. So do you have any blood in your urine? Do you have any proteins in your urine? Do you have anything that's, excreting in your urine that shouldn't be there that would indicate your kidneys are not filtering correctly? Right? That's easy. It's $25. So, I mean, that's an easy one to do along with your insulin resistance markers, along with your blood pressure. And then you get into here's the thing. You can do the stuff like you can do the APOB. I think it's a great marker. You can do the particle size, but that is not, it's probably still not quite as good as actual imaging.
Yes.
For people that don't know, what's the APOB?
So APOB is a protein, I believe.
Yeah.
So
There's
go ahead.
APOB and there's APOA. APOA
APOA.
is more so like associated with HDL. APOB is associated with LDL, and both LDL, HDL, chylomicrons, they're all just lipoproteins because basically, like in the body, fats can't. They're like hydrophobic, so they can't really travel in the bloodstream, which is a lot of water, right? So it has to be bound to a protein. So that's why they're called lipoproteins. It's a combination of the two. And so if you think of each molecule of lipids as like a globe, the APO is like a thing that hooks around it. Like it physically wraps around that molecule and it takes it for a ride through the bloodstream. And APOB has a high affinity for attaching to the arterial walls. That's why LDL is so destructive in that sense.
Yeah.
So
But
high APOB indicates higher risk for
yeah, because it's a direct reflection on how many
plaque.
particles of
Yeah.
LDL there are. So it's like a 1-to-1 ratio. Like every LDL particle has to have an APOB attached around it in order for it to move or get attached to the arterial walls. So that's why it's a direct marker. And some people will test total cholesterol or they'll test LDL-C versus LDL, but that's the cholesterol content within the particle itself.
You have particles, and then you have, so if you do an NMR profile too, it'll show you it'll show you cholesterol and then particles. So there'll be two numbers.
Yeah. Like a lot of people will look at a lipid panel, they think like HDL they call it the good cholesterol, and then they call LDL the bad cholesterol. But HDL and LDL are just like transport mechanisms. Think of it that way instead. It's not cholesterol, like it's transport because there's triglycerides involved in it as well. There's always like a mix between triglycerides, cholesterol within these particles. That forms the core of each of these.
So if you start, let's say you're not at the point, you haven't got an echo done, you haven't got a calcium score done, CT, nothing like that. So like you can kind of start to see the accumulation of risk factors there. You could put triglycerides in that, like when you're looking at the insulin resistance piece, chronically high triglycerides are usually an indicator there as well.
Yeah.
So if you have risk factors that would damage the arterial structures, insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, for example, and you have high amounts of APOB, or you just have chronically high, and you're having like chronically high cholesterol levels, especially, you are at higher risk of plaque buildup because now the walls themselves are susceptible to things sticking to them.
Yeah.
So theoretically, even if you had the higher cholesterol and maybe even a little bit borderline APOB, but your insulin levels were very controlled and your glucose levels were very controlled and all that, you would still be at a lower risk than the other scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like none of those things are good, but it's like you have to have an accumulation of risk factors for this to all kind of manifest.
Mm-hmm.
Once plaque builds up in there, can it ever undo and clear out, or is it permanent?
No, it can clear out. I mean, that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why HDL is so important because HDL, can, lower, the risk of, plaque buildup by literally clearing out your arteries. And that's one of
Oh,
the
okay.
main reasons why steroid use, like PED use, actually will lower HDL. So I'm sure, any of us who's used PEDs before, like, myself, I have had very, very low HDL. When we first started Trey, you were talking about how your HDL was like a 1 or a 2, which is very, very low because HDL at a bare minimum should be around a 40, based off of most lab tests, right? And so any sort of anabolics basically will affect something. I forget what the enzyme is called, but it basically destroys HDL. And so you lose the ability to self cleanse your system. And that's why you see
Oh,
that
I
on the
never put
labs, and
that
that's what
together then.
allows
Okay,
LDL
so
to go high.
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And certain certain vitamins and minerals and stuff too can potentially can potentially help with plaque, like dissolving plaque and getting rid of plaque. So
Yeah.
don't don't have nutrient deficiencies, take like a good K2
Yep.
complex, assuming you're not on like blood thinners or some, any kind of medication like that. But you can, I think that family history is probably another good thing to know too, especially the thing that's a scary one here, unfortunately, is like stroke risk and acute events that are harder to track, right? Like these markers, you can kind of see these things over time, but knowing if you're at higher risk of like acute events like stroke, for example, did that happen in your family? Do you take, have you been on birth control for a long period of time? If you're a lady, have you had blood clots before? Um, things like that. If you are one of those people, you might want to, well, there's a couple things you can do. There's genetic tests. So I think what factor five, I think's the one, a common one that you can check genetic mutations, but you can do like fibrinogen. You can look at like fibrinogen levels. The other one that the other one that I had looked at in some people was D-dimer levels,
Oh yeah.
but it's it's kind of hit or miss because with D-dimer levels, they go up with age, so they're not super accurate when you get up into, when you're a little bit older anyhow. But with fibrinogen, that's a protein that helps form blood clots. So if theoretically, if you were to look and check your fibrinogen levels and they were very high, that would show you have a lot of clotting action going on. That's abnormal,
Yeah.
right?
Fibrinogen. And then I guess if you were also running high red blood cells and hematocrit and stuff, it's just a
Yeah,
recipe for
you potentially be at higher risk. So
yeah.
because I'll check my fibrinogen I've never had a problem with it, but it's something I just throw onto my blood work maybe like once a year, once every other year, just to kind of, just for peace of mind
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. I remember around when COVID, when people were getting vaccines and all that stuff, I actually dug way into those clotting factors, the D-dimer, the fibrinogen, different genetic risk factors and things like that, because I was just like, this could become a thing. I want to kind of
Mm-hmm.
learn a little bit more about it. And so I did some of those tests on myself. Knock on wood, I've never run into anyone that has had really high clotting factors. So hopefully I don't.
Yeah.
But it's stuff you can check. I mean, this is all accessible wherever you guys order private labs. It's easy to get, you
Yep.
know. You can pretty much get anything. And I know now there's walk-in clinics there's like cardiac labs that you can get walk-in echoes and stuff done depending on where you live.
It really. I haven't heard
Yeah.
of that one yet.
I don't know what you'll pay for it. It'll probably
Usually,
be,
like in the more places with more poverty. I think I remember
yeah,
John Jewett was talking about that at one point a few
Hmm.
years ago.
yeah.
You got to think
There's
about places where it's poor, they need better access to stuff than most places. So I've had clients go about it that way. They just go to the poor part of their area. They'd be able to access it pretty easy.
I
probably
think we
get
can
enough
talk about
get
maybe like some basic lifestyle changes that people can start making or continue making on a regular basis to lower their risk factors or susceptibility. And I think I would just begin with hydration,
What I
staying
was
on
gonna
top of
say.
hydration, making sure that your blood doesn't get thick. Just being dehydrated for one day and you test your CBC, CMP, and you can notice an uptick in hematocrit, just because the blood is, thicker. It's composed of water. So I would say, get your water in, gallon a day standard is what I would recommend. And I think I would add keeping some cardio in as well, lower intensity to moderate intensity. Depending on your risk factors, you may not want to do high intensity cardio and get your heart rate up past a certain percentage of your max. But I myself, I like to keep, at least 3 to 5 miles of outdoor walking in year round. So those two things I think can go a long way.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've done a lot more in recent like off seasons, we'll call it, is it's easy when you have a sedentary job. If I didn't
Yeah.
do, and you guys could probably relate it, if I didn't try to do anything, I'd probably get 2,000 steps a day
Yeah, I've been
just by
that low
Mhm.
sitting.
before. It's
Yeah,
Mhm.
bad.
it's not hard. I mean, really, it's not hard to do when if you're not actively like pursuing extra activity. So I know for me, I'll do usually in the mornings, I'll start by getting some what I normally do is I'll actually answer stuff on my phone, and I just walk around the house.
There
Now
you go.
sometimes if it's nice you can go outside and do it, but then more recently in the last couple years I started adding some of the steps. I actually get on the treadmill and just to make sure I'm getting a little bit of heart rate elevation, time in there. It's not just moving at a snail's pace all the time.
Mhm.
But to Jeff's point, it doesn't need to be you don't need to be like 140 beats per minute or 150 a minute. Just getting like 20 to 30 beats maybe over your baseline is going to be sufficient for what you're looking for there.
Yeah,
So and then the secondary benefit of that is it also tends to help combat some of that insulin resistance as well.
right.
So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone there, because that's the second thing I was going to add there too, is that if you don't have chronic insulin resistance for long periods of time, you're really probably going to be at very low risk of most of that other stuff.
Mhm.
For the most part, is you really have to pay attention to that piece. I always joke like bodybuilders are type 2 diabetics, except for they prep and it reverses it. So they're like diabetes, no diabetes,
It's true.
no diabetes, and
I
and
mean,
We just have to be in 1,000 calorie deficit to make the diabetes go away.
like Eric, Eric knows I've been on like a little like dieting phase, which I just ended yesterday.
Mhm.
But I lost like, I don't know, maybe like 10 pounds in 6 weeks, and my fasted insulin dropped from a 9.6 to a 3.1. So very insulin sensitive
Mhm.
now. So that's good.
Yep.
yeah, and also from a physique standpoint, I mean, there's a point of diminishing returns in how you respond once you get that insulin resistant anyhow. So
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
that's where things like mini cuts and cleanup phases and stuff, like they're not just for body fat,
Right.
they're also for resensitizing, lowering inflammation, getting those insulin levels down. If we were to throw numbers out there, maybe that's something that would be helpful for people.
Yeah.
you know yes, you will, if you are a bodybuilder and you trying to gain muscle and you're pushing high amounts of food, your blood glucose and insulin levels are going to go up
Mhm.
Mhm.
to an extent, right? But I think that in an ideal world, we would probably try to keep those at worst, under a 10. In a good place, it's probably going to be closer to a 5 and or below. Now you don't want them out of 1. That would maybe suggest that you have some adrenal, you know,
Right.
some like adrenal issues or something going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you shouldn't, we'll say this, like you really shouldn't be in a deficit walking around with an insulin of like 15. I mean, you see that sometimes. I'm like, oh God,
Well,
Yeah.
the benefit of
where were you
moving,
at before? You
the
know?
benefit of moving and a little bit of gentle cardio, like you guys were just saying, I can say it just from myself. Like, I mean, Jeff knows too. He coaches me. The last couple of years when I was really sedentary, my fasted blood glucose was over 100, like unless I was in prep, period. And then this year, working at the gym, I get 4 to 6 miles of walking, just running around that place, and a half an hour of cardio fasted in the morning. It's been 88, you know,
You're
at the same amount of food
225.
and a higher body weight.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's good. So yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's crazy.
water, regular cardio. You don't have to kill yourself. I'd say 10K steps per day max. You don't
Mhm.
need any more than that. I know some people are getting 30K, 20K out there by 7 a.m., but you don't need to do that. Um, and then manage your
That's exercise disorders,
yeah.
guys.
Don't,
30 to
stick to foods
40,000.
that are close to nature, carbs that are, complex, nutrient dense. I mean, I know when we're pushing food, some of the gummy bears have to slip in, right, Austin?
It happens.
Yeah,
But
It happens.
you
get
know,
your fruit, get your veggies, get your
yeah,
fiber, get your complex carbs. I mean, fiber has been shown time and time again to help control cholesterol and
yeah,
glucose levels. Like, but in the off season, you start ditching those foods. Those are the things that go. We've talked about it for gut health a million times, but
right.
what about for, glucose levels and
Mhm.
cardiovascular health? I mean,
It's
you
hard to
really
eat veggies when you're
Well,
sure
so sick of food,
well,
it
another
is.
you
aspect of
know.
this, guys, is like people think that you need to constantly increase your calories to like 6, 7,000 to grow, and that's just not true. Like if you just hung around at like let's say if you're like 225 pounds, Eric, like what are you're only taking in what like 3,000, 4,000
Four,
calories right
four,
now?
4,000, yeah, about four.
And
Yeah,
you're growing just fine,
yeah, easy. Yeah,
it's like the length of time. Give yourself more time. The faster you shove food down your throat, the faster your insulin goes to shit, the faster you get inflamed, you run into digestion issues, and you got to pull the plug. So you're better off to just take a moderate, middle of the ground approach and gain for like 6 months, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've found that for myself. I mean, I've done super high calories, and right now I think my training days are just north of 4,500. They're less than 5,000, and my
Yeah,
non-training days are a little bit less than that, which for me historically is lower than I've
right.
been.
I know you've had to eat a lot before.
But digestion's a little bit better that way. Um, Glucose levels, my most recent labs on that amount of food at 240. I was probably like 240 when I got the labs, maybe 238. I don't know. Regardless, my glucose, and this was on no insulin. This was like a real fasted baseline, was on was like 86, I think 86 glucose. My insulin was like 6.8.
That's great.
And I was
that's
like,
really good.
okay, cool. I've got a little bit of runway here before I'm going to get, too far out of range.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm just curious. Do you try to prioritize mostly whole food meals, or are you doing like a half shakes, or I don't know?
so
How do you keep
so
it
right when my food gets
digestion going?
higher, I will do more shakes, but
Hmm.
I tend to I when I do shakes, I tend to try to make more complete meals out of them. So like I add fiber supplementation to them. A lot
Mm,
of the time I'll put like fats in them, olive oil, macadamia nut oil, avocado oil,
yep.
sometimes like a greens powder, or I'll substitute fruit, like a piece of fruit on the side with
Yeah.
it. So I'm trying to do a more complete meal with a whey isolate or
Yeah.
something. But that's almost, I mean, that's purely from a digestive aspect and a time
Totally.
thing. It's like
Oh, I do the same thing. I try to go
sometimes it's hard.
meal shake. So there's kind of like a
Yeah.
longer window between whole foods,
Yes,
you know.
sometimes
Yeah.
it's, and if the calories get really high, I'll add carbohydrate powder to the meals too. But I
Mm,
generally will do like Carbolin or cyclic dextrin, something that digests really well. And then of
yeah.
course the fiber and the fats will kind of smooth out the effect of that, slow it down a
Mhm.
little bit. But yeah, I think those are all really great points. And I love what Jeff said there about just the pace of gain, because like once you've got past that initial phase where you're filling up with glycogen and water and kind of super compensating, you I mean, you're not going to be gaining 10 pounds a month. You're probably not going to be gaining 5 pounds a month in a lot of cases. Um, you're going to get fat and insulin
Yeah.
resistant,
You could
and
gain 5 pounds. You can just
Yeah.
get fatter. Yeah.
There was for those of you
and
who follow Mike Israetel, Renaissance Periodization, I'm a big fan of, there was a post that he made or a video where he outlined like an entire 12-month schedule of, physique improvement. And he starts off the year with like, you do like a fat loss phase from, let's say, like February, March, April, and then you're nice and lean, and then you rebound into the summer. You can enjoy the summer, you can grow from May into August, and then you do another cleanup phase, September, October, then you grow again from November, into the winter. I'm personally gonna adopt that now that I'm in my 40s. I want to look good, feel good. I don't want to get bloated. I don't want my lab markers to get skewed. So I think, for those of you who are listening who sort of subscribe to that, point in your life, and you're not 20 years old and just pushing a perma bulk, this would be a good way to, sync your lab work, your push and pulls, where you taper off and cruise versus when you blast, where you push food and do the mini cuts, according to that schedule. So that's something that, people can consider.
Funny you say that because my last 5 years, I prepped in 22 and then in 24, but they were actually on the same cycle that I was on in the off seasons too, as far as when I was like going into cleanup phases. So it's
Yeah.
basically I was still coming down and getting leaner towards the winter time and then kind of rebounding out of that.
Yeah.
And then I would do another fat loss phase around like late summer into the fall. It's just I inserted shows into there in two
Yeah.
instances, and then the other two I didn't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
it
I
can
like
work. It can work for that too. Yeah, so that's it's a good. I thought that was a really helpful post. I gotta give the guy credit for that.
Yeah, and there's in addition to that, I think that it's people are like, well, I don't need a mini cut, I don't need to do this stuff because I'm not fat. And I said, yeah, but what do your lab markers look like? What are these risk factors look like? Because there's a lot of times when people are advanced bodybuilders who have been big for a long time, you have a lot of tissue, you have a lot of exogenous hormone use coming in, you might not look fat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean that you're not still insulin resistant. I mean, I've had plenty of instances where I see people with CRPs like 30 and super high insulin levels and all this stuff, and they're not fat.
yeah,
So if you just based it on that, I mean, that's kind of it's very flawed logic.
yeah. It's definitely not about looks. You could run trend year round and look great, but on the inside, it's probably not so great.
Not
So,
so.
so
Yeah.
now, what other supplements? Like we talked about, like lifestyle stuff, so bit simple stuff. We talked about the tests that people can run. Um, I'm a big fan of just omega-3 supplements like fish oil, krill oil specifically, and cod liver oil. Those can actually inhibit the production of triglycerides, and I'm a big fan of D-limonene as well, which is a good antioxidant. I know Trey and I have talked a lot about supplements, and you always come up with stuff that like I don't really think of. So like, what other like items would you say should be like year-round health supplements
Are we talking lifestyle or competitors?
that could be used for both?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking strictly like lipids, I see no reason why people shouldn't be cycling like high dose curcumin and kyolic aged garlic year round, especially if you're on TRT or something like that. Like you're killing two birds with one stone there. Like kyolic has a combo product that has both of them in there, but you can also do separate if you're
I
trying.
just got turned on to that by Jeff, the Kyolic. Can
Well,
you
because
talk
Trey
about that a
told me
little
about
bit?
it.
Oh, it's from
The
Trey. Oh,
garlic.
cool. Educate. I want to
Yeah,
know more about
like
it.
it's just
Yeah.
a game changer. I think like any of my PD guys, I have them on a year round. They're like I'll take breaks from the curcumin at least, like because I do think like we're talking about how important it is to control inflammation, but there is a point where we need some inflammation in there, and there is sometimes where I've seen like I've had some people abuse so much curcumin they actually end up being more inflamed. I don't know the
Mm.
mechanisms, but I've had some people they're like, "Hey, my joints are hurting," and they're like, "I'm on curcumin." I'm like, "How long?" And they're like, "Oh, like 6 years." I'm like, "Take a break from it," and all of a sudden
Wow.
their joints don't hurt anymore.
All
Couldn't
right.
tell you
Okay.
why. Maybe there's some pro-inflammatory benefits, but I think those two are game changers. Um, I think Tutka, if you're not going to use Delimonene, then Tutka is an option. If we're talking more from like the plaque buildup, Pycnogenol, I think that is one. Like the Life Extension Arterial Protect, that's like one. If I know
That's
someone
another one.
is at risk based off of family history,
I
that
use
is
it
something I
every
throw
day.
on. Yeah, 100%. There's zero reason
Arterial protects good
shouldn't be
stuff.
on that. Um, I think the rest, it really depends because like we didn't talk much about the gut, and I don't want to get too deep in there, but there is some stuff like with LPS, if there's a lot of endotoxins that can impact lipids as well. So that's where
Yeah.
maybe for some for lipids and insulin resistance, maybe I'm going to start cycling in some berberine in there, and that would cover a little bit more broad spectrum as well. So I think it really depends, but I think the curcumin, the aged garlic are two no-brainers that can be in at least some point. Especially like the curcumin, if you ran into like respiratory type virus type things, there's some stuff there. You're getting some like gut benefits as well. And then another one, if people aren't opposed to like needles, is I'm a huge fan of like TB 500. Like from a heart remodelization standpoint.
What does it do for
Um,
that?
well, it remodels the heart. So like, and specifically, that is one of the things I will use. Like if
What
you
do you mean
dig into the data.
remodels? How so?
Basically, it works on inflammation, but remodels it from the sense of what's the word I want to say?
It reduces the cardiomyopathy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the
Does it actually?
Yeah.
I give it to Jeff. Jeff was
Didn't
the
know.
only person I've met that it made his red blood cells worse. I don't know why.
I thought that was something it did. I've heard
I
that
I
before.
don't you know what, Trey, like I would have to isolate that again and try it again. It could have been something else I was doing, but I got freaked out by it. And then my cardiologist was like, just stop doing all this shit. And I was like, okay.
Like
He
I
only
think that's
wanted
just
me to
one
take my
medication.
Eliquis, and he had me taking Eliquis and a Clarinone and Entresto and Metoprolol. I was on like a four different things. I'm still on them right now.
I mean,
So,
your endurance is through the roof. When we were doing that 50 rep shit, he didn't stop once.
oh yeah, the heart meds that they gave me are like performance enhancers.
Oh
Right.
yeah, yeah. He just pumps reps. It's crazy.
So I think it just depends. Like if you're trying to cover, let's say you're more inflamed, then probably go the curcumin piece. If you like just typically high cholesterol levels, maybe the garlic piece. If you tend to be more like with me with more of the insulin resistance, then probably berberine is going to suit you a bit better. And then you kind of cycle the two. So I would just think about it that way. What umbrella do you fall under? And then obviously, like if you have the blockages or there's for sure plaque, then K2 wouldn't be a bad idea if you're not on blood thinner. And the arterial protector, pycnogenol, like all of those are like good things to cover. And I guess it would just depend on what umbrella you're
Yeah.
under.
So
Yeah.
I
I
think,
think, go
oh,
ahead, Jeff.
okay. I was just going to say that, we're talking about logically approaching this for our listeners. Get the test done first.
Yeah.
Start with a simple, serum lab workup. Get your cholesterol lipid panel, get your liver tested, your kidney function, test your blood pressure. All right. Then, if you want to dig in and get what's called LDL fractionation test, you can do that if you want. It's called a cardiac IQ panel. It's about $145 on directlabs.com. And then you can bring those to a cardiologist or, your doctor. And then from there, you can, if you have any symptoms, you have a family history, like your grandmother died of a stroke at like 42, then you can say, hey, I want to dig in a little bit. These labs are a little concerning. I want to get a Holter monitor. I want an EKG. I want the calcium score, the CT coronary, that kind of stuff. Then
If I can interject real quick, Jeff, I think I feel like everything you're saying, everything we're saying is under the assumption that your doctor is a good doctor.
yeah,
There's a lot of doctors, and I've had this, I'm sure you guys have too, and maybe people listening, where you say, hey, I want to check such and such. And they're like, no. Right. So don't be afraid to push, and don't be afraid to get a different doctor. Don't be afraid to go to supervisors. All right. I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
anyways, yeah. So you figure out your baseline test first. Figure out your family history. Go get the advanced scans and see what the actual physiology looks like, right? Not just the clinical testing with the lab data and all that. And then you can decide, what are you at risk for more, and then you can decide which supplements that you should focus on as a year-round cardioprotective regimen.
Yeah.
That's the way to go about it.
Yeah. I love that, Trey. I love that you mentioned the arterial protect, because that pycnogenol has studies that show stabilization of plaque too, which is super cool. Like, because a lot of people kind of like, last thing I'll leave out here is a lot of people worry about soft plaque. Is this like, or plaque that kind of will displace itself and cause, blockages, or circulate and cause blockages. The pycnogenol seems to, the one study I saw was something along the lines, it was like, and 3 to 6 month span, depending on the participants in the study. It helps stabilize it. So if you are someone that does have calcium, a higher calcium score, it might not pick up all the soft plaque, but chances are if you have hard plaque, you probably have soft plaque. Um, Probably. So the whole idea there was the soft plaque will kind of displace itself off of the buildup and then circulate through the blood and cause like a acute blockages or acute cardiac event. So that pycnogenol was pretty cool, and I found that stuff a while ago, and I've just always used the arterial protect from Life Extension for
It's the
that
best
reason.
one out there. Like, is that they put tongue as a what's the other thing they put in
Let's
there?
see. It also has
Is it Go to Cola that's in there?
I can tell you because I had just ordered more of that stuff actually. I just take one per day.
One is enough.
It also has,
Yeah, it's got Go to Cola in it.
yep, and
Yeah.
pycnogenol.
I got
But like that's one of those things that covers so much stuff. Like there's stuff in there for stroke. Like that's why like Jeff, I mean, you've seen it the more you and I talk, and Austin sees it when we do group and me and him talk. Like we're not just like, hey, take niacin and just focus on that. We're talking more broad spectrum where you're covering a bit more. Because regardless, like no matter what's causing the cholesterol, you've got to think about what's going to cover more bases. Me taking a Arjuna or a niacin, or is it taking like a berberine or curcumin? Because like I can tell you, a niacin or a Arjuna or citrus bergamot isn't going to magically fix everything if the issue is like say insulin resistance or say inflammation. So if you go more this multifaceted umbrella approach, then you're kind of hitting more things, more bang with your buck than this targeted approach we've always seen within at least the bodybuilding industry or coaching industry, where we see people they're on 30 different things just for cholesterol. And it's like, well, why don't we shorten that, not stress out yourself or stress out the client? Let's not stress out their wallet. Why don't we simplify it? That's going to calm them down. It's going to lower stress, lower oxidative stress and inflammation as well. And then why don't we pick the biggest bang for our bucks that will actually do the job and cover more bases? Um, so I
Yep.
think if like anyone listening, if you kind of approach it that way, along with the lifestyle stuff we touched on, you're really in a good place versus having to specialize so much,
Yeah.
hyper focus on things.
Yeah. And Jeff summed it up is what are your risks, like what are your risk factors? Understand what those are, and then you can approach it, you know what to approach, and also understand where the risk factors are coming from. If you have chronic amounts of inflammation, but why? Right? You're like, well, I'm insulin resistant all the time. Like, okay, well, let's look at that first. Let's figure out why that's there first. Is this a nutrition thing? Are you getting too fat too often? Are you too stressed? Do you have gut issues? Like, why is that there? You might be because at a lot of the time, and you guys know how it is with functional health and prevention in this space. It's basically just Western medicine using over-the-counter supplements. It's not a root cause as much as people want to say it is. There's not a lot of root cause coaching going on when that's how you're approaching it. That's not a root cause approach.
Yeah.
That is a side effect. That is you're addressing a symptom approach, which is fine in some cases, but it doesn't solve a problem, So
Great.
that's my soapbox. I'll step down from that one. But cool, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Awesome.
we covered like pretty high level. I mean, there are other things we could have gone into, like, why, cholesterol or lipids worsen when people get older, or, alcohol, fatty liver and all that, but maybe we could save those for another time on one of these more technical discussions.
Yeah.
Talk about we'll do the series on problems that bodybuilders have and why.
Yeah.
Here's episode 1, which is cardiovascular and renal.
That'll never end though. That's like an endless series.
But that's the first one. That's definitely the first one.
Yeah.
I don't know how many gut health epipedes we're gonna have to do.
Yeah.
But get a
Awesome.
good therapist. Maybe have an exorcism. You should be good to go.
Yeah.
What's
All
that,
right,
to cure
guys.
bodybuilding? to cure the
Yeah.
curse of bodybuilding.
Yeah, you need an old priest and a new priest.
Yeah,
Young
exactly.
priest and an old priest.
Anything else you guys want to add to this discussion?
Not
That was
today.
a good one, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
I hope you guys enjoy listening, and we'll see you soon.